Oh, hello everyone. I'm really excited today because I get to talk with Matt Ehret, who is one of the brightest stars out there, in my opinion, along with his wife, Cynthia Chung. And they have three websites where they are very prolific in putting out tons of videos and articles and talks that we will put at the bottom of this video so you can get more information from them. Um, So Matt, uh, I was 18 years old when Kennedy was shot. I remember it, and I was visiting my high school for some reason, and it was really a shock. And I have to tell you that at that point in my life, I was pretty naive and somewhat lost, and really didn't understand what was happening. So I know that you've already done a number of videos and talks about that event and the ramifications and what led up to it, and and that's why we're putting your links below so that people can really get into it deeply. And I'd like it if instead you would perhaps briefly talk about what you know, or I could just ask you, do you think that Kennedy was naive to openly announce that he wanted to dismantle the CIA because it was shortly after that they assassinated him in broad daylight? What's your opinion about that?
Yeah, I do think that he definitely made a series of missteps. And was he too brash and youthful in trying to move too fast against something he didn't fully understand the depth and scope of? I think you might be onto something. I think that he did perhaps move too fast. He lacked a certain elderly statesman patience, and that's something that comes with youth. That being said, he definitely, when you actually study his strategy, his work, his speeches, and the buildup of his life before he became president, there's a lot of experience, much more so than people give him credit for, as far as a man of wisdom and a very high level statesman who did understand the nature of the game. I mean, obviously, the events of Dallas in 1963, deciding at that moment when you've made the enemies that you've made, to then go out with an open top car ride, directly just the way he did, that does indicate a certain, like you said, naivete. But
Yeah, yeah,
yeah,
correct.
I do think though that people don't properly appreciate still uh, the multi-leveled fights on so many levels that he was waging at the same time. It's quite amazing to get into the mindset of somebody in his position, as almost, he had very few allies that he could trust, even within his own circle, within his own cabinet. He had his brother, he had a few others, but very few. Most people were part of the deep state, which is not a new thing. We give it that term today, but it's been around for a long time, even before Kennedy, long before Kennedy. And it was bad in his time. It hasn't gotten better, but it's something that he had to deal with every day.
Yeah, I think, the fact that he was murdered in broad daylight in front of thousands and millions of watchers, and then his brother was murdered on TV in front of everybody, is kind of a statement that they're making that probably has had a large effect on what followed in the history of the world. What do you think?
Most certainly, yeah. And I mean, it really was a message of intimidation to the world and to Americans and to people who were in a position to do something um, around that period in time to basically shut the hell up, or this is going to happen to you, as a direct message. And it's sort of like what you see in a prison yard. Somebody is made an example of in a prison yard, and they're shivved in public, as a message. This is something which has gone on for a long time as a technique, and it unfortunately works more often than not. And certainly the openness of that whole thing, having it carried out, like you said, in broad daylight with his brother as well, following soon thereafter with Martin Luther King. Just a few months before his brother was killed, Martin Luther King was also killed, which did set off riots all over the United States. It really, these did represent the better part of the institutions of of the constitutional heart of the United States, because today, we've been living in a world dominated by this very unipolar, imperial United States that's been crushing small countries for decades. And a lot of people have forgotten, because of the traumatic experience that they've had with the current United States, they've forgotten that there was this opposing better tradition which gave rise to the best expressions of presidents that usually tend to get shot or poisoned for whatever reason while in office, all the way going back to the first early years of the Republic being created. And so it's important to have that sense of these two Americas at odds with each other, because one is not really American. One represents everything that the U.S. the early founding fathers tried to break free from, and in many ways did, but they never finalized the American Revolution. They created a peace treaty with the British, but that a peace treaty is just on paper. That doesn't mean that the enemy actually still forgave you and said, okay, now you're going to be independent and you're going to do your thing and we'll just ignore you. No, there was always internal operatives and institutions that created things like Wall Street, that created things like the American intelligence agencies, which great presidents are always doing battle with internally, while at the same time, if you look at whether it's Lincoln or whether it's McKinley or whether it's FDR or whether it's Warren Harding, or there's several others I'm not even mentioning in JFK, they're on the one hand doing battle with this parasite while uplifting the people, actually doing things that benefit the minds, souls, and bodies of the people by providing an increase and improvement of the quality of life by forcing the monetary system to obey higher laws of nature, which, we need water, we need water systems, we need water management, we need electricity. If you don't do those things, people suffer physically, right? And that doesn't give a very fertile soil for the soul to express its creative potential. So they're doing that, and they're also internationally always doing the same thing by going to poor countries and saying, let's help you stand on your own 2 feet. Let's help you learn how to fish, not just give you money, give you some fish for the day, but really these guys like JFK, and we could talk about this later, all had a foreign policy orientation towards Africa, South America, other countries, towards how can we help you become a full spectrum economy that can be an honest business partner with us in win-win cooperation, versus the Anglo-American policy, which is how can we help you stay in the mud, suffocating while we rape you and steal your resources for our own benefit. That's the other paradigm, which
that's what I wanted to ask you about, because from watching your videos and your talks, it seems clear that there's really two, like you say, two Americas, or two different sides that have been going on for probably hundreds of years. This problem of like now with the oligarchs or the neocons or whatever you want to call them, the WEF and all these dark state type people, and then you have the other side, which seems to be like the good guys. They're trying to uplift humanity and help countries, and honestly, I'm so cynical about politicians that I never gave Kennedy or FDR the credit that you seem to give them when you point out a lot of the good things that they were trying to do and what they did, and how that was completely subverted when they died, and how you also mentioned that all the presidents that have been murdered and the ones that mysteriously died in office were all presidents who were more or less on the side to do good for humanity. And so as far as like, how would you characterize the side that's good? Would you just say it's basically they're trying to uplift humanity on a wide scale?
Well, I don't want to be accused of falling into a Manichaean dualism of like light versus darkness, like the good angels versus the demons. I don't want to do that, because
seems like that.
Yeah, well, and I get that, because when you look at the personalities of a lot of these people who tend to get assassinated, you won't find angels. Like, they've got all sorts of problems, It just doesn't. But what you do tend to get is a recognition that there's some people who see within themselves, because human beings, here's the way I see it, human beings were the only species to craft our own identity. Other species, you give a crocodile sunlight, crocodile food, a crocodile mate, and a crocodile environment, the crocodile is happy. You take it out of that environment, maybe treat it like a bird, throw it in the sky or whatever, throw it in a tree, it won't be happy. Give it bird food, it won't be happy. So every creature has its essence, and it's not willful. It is what it is. Whereas a human being, you could give it all of the material conditions of what would make us physically happy, like put us in a mate, human food, all these things. And you'll still find a lot of people who live comfortable lives, but are still ultimately depressed as hell, and it's not just the physiology that makes us who we are. We have a willful ability to choose where we situate our role, our purpose within a broader process, because we are also aware of our finiteness. Animals don't carry around, like my family tree of my grandpa crocodile, and they're not going to make sacrifices for their future kids. So there's two types of, like, if you're a human being who is shackled in a lower order sense of identity, that your sense of self-worth and meaning is tied to your physical pleasures, something which is ephemeral and fleeting, you will tend to have certain attributes to how you think, how you react to certain situations, which are relatively predictable. You will tend to be afraid of death. If the only thing you found as meaning in your life is your personal pleasure, or maybe fame or something, or your projection of success.
Let me just interrupt you for a second, if you don't mind.
Sure.
Because you're really hitting on something that I wanted to talk to you about maybe a little later, but we can start right now, because I think that if you think about it, like, the consciousness that humans have is different than the consciousness of other animals, obviously, but they are conscious, but we have the ability to choose and to step out of our instinctual necessities that we have. And so, and then the fact that we are animals, but we have this special ability in our consciousness, gives us, like, the ability to live ethically. Animals can never be unethical.
No, they can't.
But humans
put a
can.
lion in prison for eating a baby rabbit or something. It's just it's being a lion. You can put humans in prison for eating a human baby.
Right. So animals cannot be guilty of that. But humans, we have this consciousness that it's like a double-edged sword, in my opinion, because we have the ability to make a lot of decisions that go beyond, or that are within the instinctual needs that we have. But we also have the ability to make a lot of wrong decisions with this kind of consciousness. When it's all instinctual for most animals, I would imagine that most of their decisions are pretty good. But with us, we have this dual sword, double-edged sword.
Yeah.
And the reality, in my opinion, is that humans have been living more on the animal level for the whole time, because our society is totally unethical or unethical, whatever it is, and forever, it seems. And we never have moved to that point where we're living in a ethical society. And I would say also that, like, when we're growing up, most of us realize that there's something off about the whole human race. And then when we get a little bit older, we discover that almost everything is corrupt. And so you have, like, in Shakespeare's play Hamlet, you have him having the same problem when he comes home from the university and discovers everything's corrupt in Denmark. And then the play is about, well, what's he going to do about it? And that's a very interesting question, because of the fact that we're all in the same exact circumstances, everybody in the whole world. And what do we do about it? And you have to say, it's obvious, we don't do much. Most people don't do anything.
We're on the same page. I see where you're going. And that's what I was sort of setting up in my own words, and you set it up in your own words, but that's really the differentiation thing, right? If you don't want to be a Hamlet, if you want, because Hamlet had all of these opportunities to be the leader he could have been as the Prince of Denmark in crisis, and he had the creative drive, he had passion, he had youth, he had all of these attributes to be the people loved him. But he was so caught up into his own inner turmoil, his own paranoia and anger for the likelihood that his father was probably killed by his uncle who became king, you know. But these guys were going to be old. They were very old. Like it was only a matter of time before he became the ruler. But he got so caught up in his own internal stuff that he just wasted that potential, and the whole situation devolved quickly.
Well, wait a second.
Yeah.
I disagree with you about that. That's the general. Yeah, I do, because that's the general thesis about him, that he's neurotic or he didn't know what to do and all that. But actually, I don't see it that way at all.
Okay.
I think his behavior was very rational, and he was very careful. He wanted to be sure that he was right, and so he had that little play within a play to see how the new king would react, and he was very careful before he made a decision as to what he would do. And then he did make a decision. And it wasn't an easy one, because it ended up with his death, and everybody else, all the major figures in the play, died. And that's kind of a message too from Shakespeare. It's like it reminds me of what Martin Luther King said when he said that if there's nothing to die for, there's nothing to live for. And how we have those patriots, what's his name, Henry, who said, if there's nothing, if I would, what he said, give me liberty or give me death. Now that type of thinking has really gone out the window. And most people, when they have this conundrum of having to choose between health security or civil rights and freedom, it's like 99% choose health security. So they're not the ones who are going to stand up for freedom at all. They're going to try to stay alive, even if it means being enslaved, which a lot of them may not recognize. So what do you think about that, Matt?
Well, here's why I would disagree with you, is the issue of Fortinbras.
Yeah.
Because at the end of the play, after everybody is killed, and Laertes, his other honorable friend, is also killed. Everybody is killed, right? The mother is killed. Everybody. What happens at that point is the whole, from the beginning, where there was always something rotten in the state of Denmark, and there was the danger of the enemy camp coming in and taking over. Fortinbras comes in at the very last scene and just literally takes over without a fight. And then at that moment, Denmark is completely conquered and taken over by its enemies. And Fortinbras is like, wow, I thought I would have to fight a battle, but they just did it to themselves. And I think for me, that one, and also if I combine that with the famous monologue of To Be or Not to Be, where he chooses, unfortunately, to not be. In fact, and you can see that by the end, he chooses not to be. He ceases to be, even though he was probably right. His the play is the thing that'll catch the conscience of the king. He was probably correct logically, and everything he did was calculated. But it was, I think, a misuse of creativity, because the result was the enemies of Denmark did completely take over. He was not the champion of Denmark that he could have been. That's why I would just maintain my thesis. But that's another conversation.
Yeah.
I think that as far as JFK is concerned, I think he was one of these examples of a Promethean character type with their human problems. They were somebody who located the purpose of their identity in something much bigger than the boundary conditions of their birth and death. And like Martin Luther King, who said, if you have nothing, if you don't have a cause you're willing to die for, you don't have a life worth living for. And you could live until you're 95, but still have been dead when you were 30, living a wasted life, because you've just been pursuing ephemeral. You've been living for the ephemeral, not for the eternal. Right. So I think, and things like conscience and the health of our soul, having a concept that there is something immaterial within us that gives us access to something on high, and valuing the health of that more than the health of our body. It's a very important thing, and I bring up the word Prometheus because America itself is a Promethean experiment. It's not looking very good right now, but if you look at the character of Prometheus, right? From ancient
was he the one who had his liver eaten up? Was that him? Yeah, he brought fire and he had his liver forever being picked apart by birds.
Remember why? Like, what was his transgression that he had to suffer like that?
He gave humanity fire.
And Zeus had a law, right? Because Zeus and the immortals of Olympus, the gods said, no, the law of the land is human beings have to remain living in caves in ignorance as playthings for the deities. And he being a demigod, saw potential. So he was not just seeing people as they were, but saw them as they could be, and thus disobeyed that edict by stealing the fire when Zeus had done his drunken orgy one night and was totally like passed out. He stole the fire. And in the play by Aeschylus, he makes a point that it wasn't just fire, but also astronomy, mathematics, arts, poetry, animal husbandry, everything that, so fire is a metaphor for something much more broad that pulled mankind out of the caves. And thus he was punished. I don't think it was for eternity, but it was something ridiculous, like 10,000 years of every night having your liver eaten up, as punishment. But the point with Prometheus, the word itself means to foresee, to see the future, to have foresight. So the idea of this knowledge, this power that the animals don't have, comes with two things. Using it well is contingent upon acting not for your momentary benefit, but for future. So animals can't foresee the possibility of droughts periodically happening, or they can't put food reserves aside the way humans can.
Well, squirrels do.
For one season. But when you have like a whole, like, let's say, let's say it just so happens you get a really bad, like, what we had in the Little Ice Age back in the 17th century for 80 years of just cold. A lot of animals don't do well. And, at a certain point, mommy rabbits eat their baby rabbits and the population re-regulates according to the scarcity. And that's just the way they do it.
Yeah.
So human beings can build, flood controls to avoid the periodic overflows of an area, or we can put grain aside. So we can do things that involve ever increasing future states. The more you know, the more you can sort of plan. The more you're sensitive to the cycles of destruction, the more you can plan ahead.
Yeah.
And when you don't, the cycles will, like what Solon was told by the priesthood, the priest at Amun. When Solon went in ancient Egypt, the guy who pulled ancient Athens out of the Dark Age, he went to Egypt and he studied at the Temple of Amun to learn a bunch of things. And the priest said, the problem with you Greeks is you don't have any old men among you. You have no memories of the past cataclysms, of the floods that destroyed past civilizations and the fires from the sky, which were probably asteroids. You just don't remember anything. And so you're all like young children. And he was told of the past. That's where you have the Atlantean story in Plato's Timaeus. That's where this anecdote comes out. So we have this ability to discover by the more invisible causal principles of nature and within space and time, right? And the more we're able to expand our consciousness, our sphere of awareness, and put ourselves into other people's shoes, even the ones in the future who haven't been born yet, and sympathize with them, and then feel for those who have come before us and died and sacrificed, and take on that sense of, wow, people died for me. Martin Luther King, John F. Kennedy were willing to give their lives for a world that I lived in. It changes who you are on a spiritual level, and it makes you become a bit more if you find that inner Prometheus, that might be a little bit of a spark, and it becomes a more hot fire the more you think like that and work on it. And I think that's where people like, again, Martin Luther King Jr., JFK, Roosevelt, Lincoln, when you read their personal writings, they're all deeply immersing themselves in history, and they all have that sort of experience. So they're able to find a certain courage to stand up against something that they understand is a globally extended evil beast of an oligarchy. They understand it to varying degrees, and it takes a lot of courage to be able to say, okay, I'm going to actually be prepared to give my life to fight this thing. So I mean, JFK. The problem that I get is that a lot of people get depressed when they read the stories of assassinated leaders, and they're like, oh, see, that the moral lesson there is you shouldn't do anything or else you die. And it's like, well, wait a minute, maybe you're taking the wrong lesson out of that. Maybe the lesson should be that an individual could scare the hell out of something so powerful that it can only go out of their way to kill an individual, whether a Gandhi or a, like name a martyr, right? There's so many. So there's something very weak and vulnerable inside of this evil empire system, which individuals, if they tap into a certain source, are able to challenge in a serious way. And that should empower and inspire you, regardless of what time in history you're living. That's an inspiring thing. The idea of Prometheus, who was willing to take the pain. And Zeus said, if you just simply tell me how I'm going to die, that was Zeus's condition to Prometheus. He said, you are the only person who can see the future and who knows how I'm going to die. You tell me, and I will let you go free. I'll stop the torture. And Prometheus wouldn't have it. He was like, no, I'll take the torture. I know that your time is up at a certain point. And we don't have the trilogy, unfortunately. So Aeschylus's Prometheus Unbound was lost to time. So we don't know how the character was ultimately liberated. But the point was that takes a lot of courageous defiance in the face of such evil. Like the American revolutionaries were, many of them were like that.
Yeah, I think that's kind of what we might need these days. And unfortunately, I read Aeschylus maybe 50 years ago, so I don't remember it that well, but I was impressed by it.
Yeah.
So there's a lot of other areas that we can also talk about. And for instance, like in reading your material, I noticed that you are one of the people who don't believe that the CO2 is a problem in the environment.
Yeah.
Could you, because I was under the impression that CO2 was blocking the heat from reflecting off the earth, and that's why it was heating up. Is that not true in your opinion?
In my opinion, the evidence and data that I have analyzed, with many others, I mean, I'm not a climate scientist, but there are a lot of and especially climatologists, people who look at the role of the sun as far as a driver of weather systems and stuff. People who look at that whole context, all tend to come to the same conclusion. It's just that CO2 itself doesn't seem to actually be a causal factor in temperature changes. They used to call it global warming. Now it's climate change. The reason why, so I published a few articles on this, just sort of compiling the data that I've encountered from scientific studies. One of the most persuasive things, two things I would say. Number one is that if you have a greenhouse, first of all, okay, on a low level, if you have a greenhouse as a farmer, you almost have to buy a carbon dioxide machine that emits and puts carbon dioxide up to 1,400 or 1,500 parts per million into the greenhouse, and the effect is very lush, vitamin-rich, happy plants that just it's plant food, you know. So the idea that 400 parts per million, which is around the average on the Earth, is the natural best way, because it happens to be the case at this moment, has a lot of assumptions to it. You know, that the plants couldn't be happier if you had more is one of the assumptions. So plants are a heat sink, or a carbon capture sink. Obviously, they love it. It's food. On the other hand, the other persuasive thing that I encountered is that when you begin to analyze a lot of the longer data sets that are utilized to make the case that CO2 and temperature go hand in hand, they certainly do go hand in hand. Al Gore was correct in that part of his documentary where he showed you that graph, and then he projected it into the future, and it's like burning Earth by 2050. Or actually, I think he said by 2020 or something, and by 2010 we'll all be underwater. But anyway, that's true. The thing is, which one is causal? Because correlation is not causation, and when you start zeroing in on which one follows, it's that you will always, or almost always, tend to find the temperature going up or down before you find the associated changes up or down in the CO2 within the atmosphere, or within ice core samples going back hundreds of thousands of years. Yeah. Indicating that it's the temperature itself which is the driver, and the CO2 is the effect. So the heating up of the oceans being one big one. What causes that is usually things that are going on in the sun, which causes oceans to heat. Half the world's chlorophyll is in the oceans, in algae and other sorts of simple plant life, and that will cause, also with volcanoes, with other rotting plant leaves, other things. So the human part of the CO2 contribution is very minimal. I used to think it was like, I ask most people, I used to think it was like, if you asked me 15 years ago, I would have said 15%, 20% is human CO2 as far as the contribution to the greenhouse gas effect. And I've seen most people I've asked tend to think something really big like that. That's nowhere near the reality. The reality is, of all the greenhouse gases, 95% of that is water vapor. Of that 5% that isn't water vapor, about less than 2.5 or 3% is CO2. but that's natural CO2 without human beings. Of that little bit, how much of that is CO2 that's caused by people and industrial activity? We're talking less than 1%. So it's less than 1% of 2.5%, which is, again, to completely demand or expect that all of the 8 billion people in the world should completely modify their behavior en masse in accordance with a decarbonization strategy, which, if you look at what the effect will be by going along with the Great Reset and a lot of these other things that have been in operation for decades, they've been preparing the groundwork for this idea of shutting down global carbon output. You are going to, the effect will be mass death. You will not be able to sustain human life in any magnitude similar to the 8 billion we have. We're going to put new constraints on our ability to produce and sustain life. That's
because
like,
we're so dependent. We're so dependent on oil products for so many things.
Yeah, petroleum for plastics, and there's so many things. And also, one of the things in the COP26 conditions, when they're trying to create these one world government regimes to enforce decarbonization quotas in every country, which was the ultimate goal of COP26, was to basically get a gateway towards one world government, to get enforcement mechanisms to tell countries you're being bad, and especially poor countries who have all of this coal or oil under their soil in Africa or elsewhere. You're basically telling them, well, unfortunately, if you use those resources to pull people out of poverty that are in your country, that's illegal. That's bad for nature. So they want to punish them, or maybe give them money to bribe them to not do that by carbon capture, or what do you call it? Cap and trade and carbon swaps and these things, or just give them direct money directly, which has always been a very imperial program, masquerading behind a benevolent, we want to be stewards of nature. But no, you don't care about nature.
No. Let me just ask you this then, something that's kind of off the wall for a lot of people, but what's your opinion then about the possibility of the HARP installations affecting the extreme climates? Do you think that's a reality?
No, because there's been extreme. I could talk about HARP. My thoughts on HARP. I've got some thoughts on it. But we're being told propaganda-wise that the extreme climate is a new thing. That we've never seen extreme climate like this. That's garbage. We have records of extreme climate out of the wazoo, going back every decade, even beyond the 19th century. I mean, we're not experiencing. We're just being given sort of a repeated voice in an echo chamber that this is the most crazy weather ever, and it's not. But on the other hand, yes, human beings can influence the weather with ionizing antennas. That's something which HARP was designed to experiment with. We know that the ionosphere, which is about, I think it's 80,000 to 160,000 kilometers above the surface of the Earth. This is a plasma. It's an ionized gas environment, which is charged by electricity, things like the constant flux of lightning bolts all over the Earth, which is what shapes the Schumann resonances on the Earth, that create the electromagnetic environment in which living things evolved, and our brains evolved in that environment, right? So
is that right? I mean, it's not from the cosmos, the electromagnetic.
Both. So you have constant electrical charges, sprites in the upper atmosphere, and you've got like lightning happening all the time, and it's a lot of it. So it's non. And then on the other hand, yes, you have constant streams and flux of magnetic pulsations from the sun's magnetic field, which is constantly fluctuating every 11 years, goes through minimum maximum, which moderates the flux of cosmic radiation, which flows through our biosphere, through the poles, which is why we have these beautiful aurora borealis, right, at the poles. So anyway, these are all like the things that materialists don't see. They don't want to look at these as having an effect on weather or the evolution of species, because they're all stuck in their mathematical model. It's this is the deficiency in thinking. This is how a bunch of very smart people, apparently, who our society has the greatest density per capita of university graduates. So why do we have such a deficit in thinking? Right? Nobody can identify the causes of our problems. They don't believe in Anyway, there's
Well,
a
yeah, you could also say, like, considering what you just say, why do we have the type of people running for president that we always have instead of some brilliant person who
yeah.
has a noble attitude? We have instead criminal types that are always running for president. I've never in my whole life had anyone that I thought was worthy of a vote.
I
I,
know. It's crazy. I know. I mean, and if it's like if you look at uh George Bush Jr., I mean, the guy was a failure of a person, and they voted him, they got him in. Not, I won't say that they elected him. That's disputable, but they tolerated him being in there for 8 bloody years. And Obama's a synthetic shell as much as, Biden's even worse. There's nothing there. And then you compare it to like the type of statesman you tend to get in Eurasia, and you look at like what's your background, and you got like there are nuclear scientists and engineers and people who have like, it's a meritocracy. Like people have actually worked on understanding things before they go into administration and management of politics. There's like this whole experience
yeah,
that we used to do in the West a long time ago, where it was once understood that you can't be an administrator of anything decades ago. If you haven't yourself been an engineer to be then an administrator of engineers, or you have to be a
yeah,
doctor with years of experience to be an administrator in the healthcare system to know what is it you're managing. Today we can just go straight to management school, learn how to use rhetoric, to get people to be persuaded to like us, with no concern about what is it you're managing. You just go straight into being a CEO, or God
yeah,
forbid, a politician after you become a lawyer, which just teaches you how to argue and
yeah,
lie with
right.
pretty words.
I think it
Like,
used to be called liar, but they changed it to lawyer just
ah,
because it sounds better. But
yeah.
I so I wanted to oh shit, I forgot what I was going to say, but it was about what we're just talking about.
Well, HARP. I didn't talk about HARP, right? So, okay.
Oh yeah,
So the
okay.
HARP thing, it is known that that the ionospheric rivers, or atmospheric rivers, most of the water, not most, but most of the fresh water, I would say, or close to it, is actually not in liquid form on the Earth. It's in vapor rivers in the
Mm,
atmosphere,
right.
always moving. A lot of it is over land. A lot of it is over the oceans. Most of it is over the oceans. But what we do know is that and there have been all sorts of examples in the Middle East, in the UAE, in Australia. There's been some in Russia, which utilize somewhat like HARP-like technologies with certain frequencies from antenna arrays that can then induce um, it could create sort of positive charges to pull in, because these atmospheric rivers are being shaped by electromagnetic currents in the ionosphere. You could then induce the flow of
Mm-hmm.
those river
Yeah,
systems, the vapor systems, to move
yeah,
over desert regions, and then rain, instead of it raining over the ocean and the water just cycling back into the ocean and then back into the clouds. You have it move over the ground area you want it to rain on, whereby then you can induce a certain type of cycling of the water molecules into life before it goes back out into the ocean to do it again, which is
yeah. It
not in itself a bad thing. It could be a good
could be
thing.
used for good things, but apparently it may not be.
I've never
I
seen convincing evidence that the HARP is used for the hyper destructive events that I've seen, like earthquakes in Haiti and stuff, which I've seen the accusations. I haven't seen the evidence that's persuaded me that it can do that.
But what's
But
amazing is that there's no, it seems to, like, as far as I know, there's no oversight about what they do, or where is that oversight if
well,
there
that's
is
the
any?
problem. The company that was managing it for a while was BAE Systems, British Aerospace Systems. That's the HARP. BAE was complicit in the management of 9/11. That was sort of my generation's JFK experience. Our trauma was the 9/11 thing, when I was 18. And BAE is, I mean, this is a company that works with the Saudi royal family. It was a British aerospace company with Prince Bandar bin Sultan, and they've like put together since the 80s a black budget, which has been proven, documented thoroughly, of hundreds of billions of dollars that have been put into clandestine operations. And a lot of this was tied to the activities surrounding 9/11, with its, the whole inside job thing, just like JFK's thing, assassination and the cover up. It was another inside job process in 2001. So, but the fact that BAE was the company given the contract to run HARP, and then provides tons of everything is classified. There's a lot of room for speculation. it leaves the mind all sorts of places to wonder, right? Like, what the hell is this?
Yeah. You know, I just remembered what I forgot before was
Mm,
the fact that that we always have such a terrible selection for president,
mm.
which seems to lead us to the idea that the selection process is what needs to be changed, at least, you know, because that, how do these people get selected? They're very, through these two parties, I guess, Democrats and Republicans. But that would be kind of a reform. But I'm really not about reforms too much. I'd rather see a complete system change. And so I think that the we have to really think about, uh, for example, we made an animation, a 7-minute animation explaining horizontal governing. I don't know if you've seen that.
Yeah.
And that is, in my opinion, it's necessary to get that in the heads of everyone so that we can actually make that change. Because until we make that change, every time they put in a new regime, the same thing happens again. When you have a vertical top-down thing, it's the simplest thing in the world to go to the leader and say, look, you have to take this IMF loan, which you won't be able to pay back, but we'll give you some money too. Or if you don't want to do it, we'll have to kill you. So there's that guy, John Perkins, who has those videos where he had that job and he explains how that's exactly how it works. So every time there's a revolution or a new regime, it always goes sour. And so we keep just doing the same thing over and over again, like we're insane. And so what do you think about that idea of horizontal governing?
Well, I mean, you and I have chatted a little bit about this, and I think that John Perkins, by the way, that book, The Confessions of the Economic Hitman, just as a segue, is an incredible book. Really, really strong firsthand account of how the IMF and World Bank, for anybody listening who hasn't read this and wants to understand how this neocolonialism thing took over after the death of John F. or after the death of Roosevelt, really, when these Bretton Woods organizations were created. He doesn't go through exactly the fight around the anti-imperial versus imperial forces during the early years of the IMF, which is a story unto itself. That's actually why I wrote my new book series, to go through that. He misses that a little bit, but what he does go through as far as his personal firsthand experience, and it's sort of like his confessional of what I did for decades of my life, being a
bad guy.
Yeah,
that's working. That was not a nice job he had, but
no.
he was willing to do it.
But and now at least really invaluable what he chose to do by just putting it down into an account like that. I myself right now, looking at the structure, the power structures that are in existence today, as far as the oligarchy is concerned, it's a highly centralized, globally extended power structure with a lot of moving parts. Only a few people are sort of permitted to have access to a view of the whole. Most people are trained to be compartmentalized in a very specific part. Even the managers of the system itself many of them are not given, in a sense, they're sort of
they have their realm, but
they have their realm. They have their little inner controlling cults that they themselves adhere to. This is where you start getting the weird pedophilia stuff coming through. Like, they've got their own self-controlling passions and priesthoods for the elite, and it's kind of organized in a Masonic way around like levels. So even those who you might think on the surface, well, this person's everywhere, this George Soros type character, it must be really high level. You actually find out when you start digging around, they're actually pretty far from the higher up chain of command than you might imagine. They're sort of mercenaries, but powerful, no doubt. But
do you have some idea who is at the top of this whole thing?
Names are, well, this is the thing. Yeah, you can know certain families. It matters somewhat less the individual names than it does the process to be, there's like, what's the names of the individuals who carried out the triangulated gunman who killed JFK from several different angles, right? Wasn't Lee Harvey Oswald, by the way, spoiler. Or who was it who signed the bills, who wrote their checks, right, to carry it out? it matters to a certain degree, but more important is the process that they're a part of as a character, right? And
Yeah.
um, you do have a continuity, though. I will just say it this way: you do have a direct continuity, an unbroken continuity from the oligarchical priesthoods and families that ran and managed the Babylonian and then Roman Empire systems, because it was an oligarchical system that ran the banking structures, which were tied to the temple of things like Delphi or Apollo in Greece.
Let me
And
just
yeah,
break in there,
yeah,
because so I hear what you're saying, that this is something that goes all the way back. Well, let me just ask you, when, or can you have a guess about when humanity kind of went off track in this direction? I mean, I would imagine when we started farming and people claiming land and kings and queens and people in authority started appearing, would that be your idea as well?
no, no,
No.
I don't think it was any moment. I mean, we don't have records for the moment, right? But we've come in and out, I think, of harmony of the laws of nature. So there is something that I think can be called natural law in the universe, which is there and true independently of human beings. It's already like there's gravity, there's electromagnetism, right? It's there are certain things also in the human social sphere as far as principles, ordering principles, which have to be obeyed if society is going to have the fitness to exist, to thrive. And if you defy it for too long, just like if you defy gravity, there will be consequences to be paid, and that civilization is going to decay and collapse. It'll lose the ability to sustain itself as a structure. I'm not anti-hierarchy, okay? I'm just to get that across. I don't believe in anti-hierarchy. We might have a difference there, but I believe that there is a natural and an unnatural way of having hierarchy in
Okay.
that sense.
No, I mean, I'm I tend to conform to anarchist thought
Yeah.
just because that's the way I think, and then I see that they also think the same. And generally we don't like hierarchies, but there are certainly instances where a hierarchy uh, makes sense. Like you might have the head of a hospital or something who is responsible overall for how the hospital functions, and then there's different departments under him so that he can keep track of what's going on. And the problem is with hierarchies when it's authoritative. It's okay for someone to take on the responsibility, but when they have the authority to tell people what to do is where I have a problem
Okay.
with it.
All right. Well, here's the thing. I think there's this question of law and freedom. Like if we live in a universe of law, where's the place for freedom? Obviously, human beings crave freedom. It's part of we're not happy, we're depressed when we're deprived of freedom. So that it's unnatural to be taken. But so how do we find that balance? And I think in good leaders, what you tend to find is kind of like, I guess what you just alluded to is a tendency to see themselves as servants and not as authoritarian. It's true because I say it's true, says the
Right.
dysfunctional family, unit,
Yeah.
father or mother figure,
Yeah.
and it's the same thing on the macrocosm for a society. Whereas to give the kid the freedom to make mistakes, you don't want to just like yell at your kid because they might make a mistake. You got to give
Yeah.
them that freedom, but at the same time have faith that you're not just like that they're going to figure it out on their own, but you're providing guidance too, and not just being like, yes, keep using permanent marker on the wall, little Jimmy. That's
Yeah.
cute. It's like that. Well,
No, but I think that also could take us into the idea that if you could see the problem for humanity as authority over other people, but then if you look in a little deeper, you could see it perhaps as like ego versus heart. Ego being like self-aggrandizement, and heart is like caring for everyone.
hmm,
So you could divide it into that in
hmm,
a way, and uh, so there's other ways to look at it as well. Um,
hmm,
but it's interesting if you try to look at it from the what's inside of us that's divided, perhaps, the ego identification and trying to accumulate and have self-aggrandizement and glorification, like the Catholic religion says, all glory to God. So that's like saying, don't do the ego thing. Or if you have like the devil tempting Christ before his crucifixion, offering him everything, and he refuses it because like everything is what the ego wants, and he's not going for it. But it seems to me like with the capitalist system, when many people are find themselves in a place between a rock and a hard place, and they have to decide whether to survive or give up their principles. You get into that. That seems to be, it's interesting if you try to understand the problems in the world from the problems that each individual has inside and how they're working it out. Because as it is with the materialistic capitalism that we have, everybody is like, it's me against the world. I have to find my place. I have to be in the money stream if I'm going to survive, you know? And that's one type of mentality. But if we didn't have that kind of system and people were able to not be so concerned about their own personal wealth or glorification, but were more concerned, like, for example, in the community that I live in this eco community that I founded about 9 years ago, we have that kind of issue. It's like people here really don't need to work and make money for themselves so much. What we're trying to do as a community is to elevate the life that we have here to make it as best for everyone. So you have those two different streams that find themselves in history, where the people who want to take over and control seem to be very arrogant and have the idea that they know how to do it, and the rest of the people really don't know what they're doing. So it's better that they don't. And then the other side of it is really coming from humility, where you see yourself on the absolute scale as equal to everyone. Not on the relative scale, everybody's different, but on the absolute, which is the primal scale, everybody's equal. So you need to have that humility. For example, if you become famous and have a huge following for the work you're doing, which I hope happens, you'll have that problem of it going to your ego and think, wow, I'm so incredible. Everybody recognizes that and puts me up here. Or maintaining your humility in a real way. It's a problem for anybody who's successful in a way. You see, I'm throwing a lot of ideas because I think they're all connected in a way.
I think that, yeah, you're getting at something that's very close to my heart. And I think that people will tend to get the leaders that in some ways they deserve, unfortunately. I'm not going to say it's just completely corruption and we're all good as the masses. Like, we've been this great wise mass of like good people who are just these innocent victims of like bad guys. That's Manichaean in my mind. I think in many ways there's something tragic that we've permitted willfully to become a part of our own society. And the more you tolerate a lie or you tolerate something ugly, whether it's the obvious provable cover-up of what happened with JFK and what took over, like, that is completely provable, I mean, on so many levels. But the more people
accept atrocities,
we accept what we did to Africa, we accept what we did for our cheap, like, where did our cheap labor that comes from that we're all consuming, right? What type of pain and injustice had to exist for the extraction of cheap labor and cheap resources so that we could maintain our consumer society living standards, lifestyles.
That's exactly what I see as happening right now. It's like karma, or the consequences for having been complicit by accepting all the abuses that have been going on for centuries.
Yeah.
And nobody batting an eye about it hardly, except a few protesters and people like that, activists.
Yeah.
And now it's time for redemption. It's like, okay,
no, exactly.
I mean, just allowed all this to happen. Now you're just gonna die for it, or you're gonna suffer a lot. So there's many ways to look at this thing.
Absolutely. No, and I think in that sense, for me, the most important thing about the cultural fight, because a lot of people get a little overly absorbed into political analysis, economic conspiracies. Like, those are all very important things. Okay, but I don't want to dismiss that. That's my bread and butter. I mean, I wouldn't have a job if I dismissed that. But when you start getting into history and our world, what's shaping it, the oligarchy that does exist puts more emphasis on anything else on cultural warfare. What is the field of culture that shapes those who they wish to victimize? Because it's this, what is culture? We take it for granted, right? I mean, what do you think? How would you characterize culture? If I asked you, just out of curiosity, how do you think about it as a?
Well, I would just say it's it's all the input that we get from the culture. We get the news, we get entertainment, we get religion, we get music. All these things have an effect on us.
Mm-hmm.
It's like the propaganda machine that we're been under constantly from the first day in our life.
Yeah.
It's just like nonstop, constant, and it comes through in our education system as well.
Yeah.
The whole culture is completely polluted by misinformation and propaganda.
Exactly.
That creates the mindset in the people that they're willing to accept such atrocities and
That's it. That
abuses.
right there. That's it. So the thing that I think is so important about to know that a culture has been poisoned. On the one hand, it requires an idea that there is such a thing as a healthy culture, because what is being corrupted, unless to be corrupted means you had to be healthier such that you were then becoming corrupted, right? And it's the thing that, like you said, it allows people to accept things that they would normally, if they were healthy, they would not accept. So it's less important what you think about any particular thing than how you think about almost anything. So we all have this sort of inner aesthetical compass of ugliness and beauty, of symmetry, asymmetry, of right and wrong, right? That is this inner compass is what we sort of bring evidence of things that we encounter into our soul. We contemplate with like an inner judge and jury. We have our little, devil and an angel sometimes arguing over like, well, what do I do? What are the pros and cons, right? And then we pass judgment on an evaluation. And if our sense of justice is strong, if our sense of right and wrong is strong and beauty is strong, and we fed our inner soul with good things that have weight, then we'll tend to make more consistently good judgments, which was, I think that's a good definition for wisdom, to the art of making good judgments. You're not always right, but it's how you pass, you analyze and conclude. So you get this with a lot of people who know all of the data about like how the bankers, took over nation states, the international bankers, and how they did 9/11. And you could have people who, there's so many millions of people out there who know all about this stuff, but it's like, what are you doing? How has this changed anything? Your knowledge of any of this stuff, how has that changed anything? And
exactly, that's just the same idea of Hamlet,
Yeah.
Of you get this information and then everybody has this idea, well, I'm just one person, I'm just trying to get by. What do you expect from me? I can't do anything. They all have that same attitude, basically, not recognizing that there's been great figures throughout history who were one person who did a hell of a lot by organizing and getting more people to work with them.
Exactly.
That's how it's done.
That's what gets me at the Prometheus thing again, because if you look at, again, the quality of soul that was Prometheus, one of the things he says in Aeschylus's story is he's explicit. It's the love of mankind that drives me. That's what drove me to break the law of Zeus. That's what drove me to accept the pain. It's the love of mankind. And you get that with the best Christians. What the thing that they zero in on in their Christianity is the love, the agapic love of love God and love your fellow man. And it's not so much this, did you make Jesus Christ your personal Lord and Savior thing, that it's like, well, I mean, that's maybe what you're getting out of it, though, is that he kicked the money changers out of the temple. You're getting that he loved people enough to like accept the type of Promethean. He was a Promethean. And so was Cicero, who also got his head cut off, right, to try to defend the soul of the Republic of Rome before it collapsed into an empire. And that's what you get for, I mean, look at Thomas More, right? When he got his head cut off, he was trying to stand up against the anarchy and war that he saw was going to be a consequence of breaking up the church into religious war.
Well, yeah, but try not to use that word anarchy. Just say chaos, okay? But also,
language is maybe weak sometimes. We need to differentiate the words maybe in a future. But let's
also,
say
Thomas More, I read that book a long time ago, and one thing I remember was that he actually proposed a cap on capitalism, which was apparently discussed by the founding fathers, but they decided not to do that. So
He did, yeah, in his Utopia, that's right. And the Utopia did inspire Rasmussen, and inspired many Renaissance thinkers and founding fathers. Yeah, that's what the American experiment was, in many ways an actualization, an attempt to advance the Thomas More plan.
And when people talk about utopia, it's like dismissed because they say, well, that's a dream, that's impossible. But I really think it's important for people to think of utopia. It's just a place where it's always getting better. It's always refining. It's always improving. There's feedback. There's transparency, and there's noble people involved, citizen participation. So utopia is that. It's not this dream like enlightenment. Oh, now I'm enlightened. I can just go chopping wood. No, there's no end to any of these things. They just continue,
Yeah.
So it's the same thing with utopia. And then again, that word is just like with anarchism, has been really put down.
Penalized or whatever, yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah.
So much of that. But there's a few other things I'd like to throw at you before we run out of time here, if you have the time.
I've got 10 minutes.
10 minutes? Oh,
yeah.
Gosh. Okay, because for one thing, for me, it's simple to deduce that if there's a vaccine mandate worldwide, that would be like the last store, and humanity is captured a la 1984 with no possible escape. And then you have ID 2020 coming in and everything else, booster shots forever, who knows what's in there. And so to me, it's so important to stop that vaccine mandate. I don't want to talk about whether the vaccine is good or bad. That's a whole nother subject. I'm just talking about the fact that people want, or there are mandates that are happening now, and that is really going to be the end of it for us all if that happens. And so I'm really adamant about doing everything I can to stop that from happening.
If you want to avoid censorship, because I know you're streaming onto social media and YouTube and stuff, use the jab mandate or something, because the algorithm is going to pick up the word, and that shut down your video.
That's a good idea. We can edit that out, I hope, if I said something wrong there. Yeah.
But we're in that about that today, like where like the self-censorship is it's so intense. The fight right now, like the organizing principle, coming at it from a historical standpoint. I'm a historian. I've written books on history. I try to look at it from the standpoint of like the nature of the system, the nature of oligarchy. What is the constant, whether it's today or whether it's in JFK's time or whether it's in 2,000 years ago, right? So ultimately, the thing that these control freak infantile egos, which is really, I think, this sort of level of spiritual development you tend to get in that grouping of humanity. I don't even want to call them humanity, but is a tendency for absolute control, the idea of shutting off any potential for changing the rules of the game, right? You got to play by my rules. I made the rules. You can't bring in something new that changes the rules, okay? And it's because the rules are fixed. That's why they made the rules, because you can't win as long as you play their game. So yeah, and then they have a temper tantrum and have to try to like do a regime change or kill somebody if somebody tries to actually be creative. So they're afraid of this quality of creativity that allows for human beings to come into greater communion with the laws of the universe, translate that back into the rest of our species, which allows us to then live by new, better rules that are not monopolized by these assholes. So they hate that. Their governing drive has always been population control, keep people at the status that Zeus wanted us, as like beasts living in the mud or in the caves with no knowledge of any principles. Just keep us as close to talking cows as possible.
Okay.
So I would just say that's where I'm getting at. What they want is population reduction. They want to get rid of the things that protect people from their will, which is sovereign nation states. That's what they've wanted to get rid of now for 400 years. And that's why they want.
That's a whole nother.
Well, that's the thing.
Where I might
disagree. But as far as the vaccine, because I'm tying this back into the jab.
Okay.
So the thing today is that we have on the earth two different opposing operating systems when it comes to the idea of whether populations grow and qualitatively and quantitatively or not. Mm-hmm. You have the multipolar alliance of nations working with Russia, China, India, other countries that have all sabotaged the COP26 summit. That was a one world government scheme. And then you got the ones that are completely in the Five Eyes, NATO, cage, depopulation, all that jazz, one world government. So you got these two different ways of looking at humanity and the future and law and everything else. When I look at the policy for vaccinations from both sides of those paradigms, we have definitely shady. I'm not planning on getting jabbed anytime. But you got very, very shady mRNA gene therapy technology, which has never been done on humans before, being done en masse right now to destroy people's lives if they don't do this. Can't keep your job, can't fly, whatever, if you don't get it. And
it's just
again
modern tyranny.
Huh?
That to me seems so obviously as modern tyranny that they do that, and people don't even see that. But go ahead.
It's very disappointing. I gotta say, it's been disappointing. But then you have the policies coming out of the Eurasian complex where they've rejected, like Sputnik 5, the Chinese vaccine approach. They're not declaring war on the narrative. They're going along with the narrative, just like they're going along with the narrative on global warming. But the policies for like green energy from Eurasia, or the policies on vaccinations from Eurasia versus here, it's a world of difference. So they're rejecting the mRNA spike proteins. They are rejecting mandates. So the federal governments of China and Russia in both cases have intervened on various instances on municipal and provincial levels when local overseers have tried to force mandates.
Oh, really?
Their governments have intervened blocking that. So I see that is not something that is occurring in my part of the world here. In the Americas or Europe, that ain't it. Our federal governments are largely instruments for the will. We've lost nation states. We don't have anybody behaving like a nation state here. It's all instruments for that oligarchical machinery. Whereas there, we actually have people acting like national leaders.
Yeah, that seems so unusual. But do you see how that if these vaccines, they keep pushing the vaccine mandate no matter what. And so like if this happens, that we have vaccine mandates everywhere, can you see that that's like the end of it for humanity as far as freedom goes?
You're going to have civil war and chaos. Like that's a big red line. Already we're heading into some big red lines, like the new vaccines for kids down to age 5 that are coming online. That for a lot of parents who are willing to take it themselves, that's a red line. They're not willing to like make that a mandatory for their kids. If it goes there, I don't know. I would be surprised that there would not be a lot of violence. If it becomes absolutely mandatory, this could get really messy. I don't see this as being sustainable. So,
well, that seems like they're quite willing to shoot peaceful protesters if they want to, if they have to, like they do in Colombia and Myanmar and other places. And that we might, and the one thing we have going in our favor is that they haven't yet developed robot armies that will not go down on their knees. And we have that one little hope that the people in the army won't attack their people forever. But it seems like we could face just violent repression and have to have guerrilla war. They have everything. They have all the military, all the money, everything. And so it would be a tough battle for us to have to fight that.
But that's why, like, I mean, my approach is that I know that the only serious resistance that I see that can actually win this type of fight with the sort of oligarchical centralized power structures that have the interests that they have is coming out of the multipolar alliance. So if that wasn't happening, I would be a much more depressed person than I am.
But you have confidence then in the China, Russia, India,
a lot more
Iran?
More than I got out of anybody coming out of my Canadian government, that's for sure.
No, but what about Putin? He's had such a terrible background and reputation from the past.
Well, reputation and reality are two separate things, you know. Like if I look at the actual fight that he waged against his own Russian deep state for the past 25 or 20 plus years, it's a valiant fight. Like this guy has probably saved our lives on multiple occasions, and most people in the West are too dumb to even realize that he did that. So many levels. You know, like, but he like literally, like all of these oligarchs, he went to war with these guys who were all like created in the 1990s during Perestroika when everything was privatized under Yeltsin and Gorbachev. You had a creation of a billionaire class loyal to Wall Street in London. And for those who, they had 3 destinies when Putin came in and started his war of nationalization of the privatized companies, was either you play by my new rules now, and some of them did, or we're going to arrest you and you're going to go to jail, which a lot of them did, or you can avoid jail by going into exile, which a lot of them did, and they call that Moscow on the Thames in London. That's the all of these big Russian mansions in Britain. It's literally called Moscow on the Thames, where they all lived in sanctuary, protected by their owners in the city of London.
Okay, let me just stop
Yeah.
you here because we don't have much time.
Okay.
And there was a couple themes that I wanted to talk to you about, which I don't think we have time for. One is the thing that China is doing, the
Belton Road, New Silk Road,
the
Belton Road Initiative.
Yeah, Belton Road Initiative.
Yeah.
That's one thing I want to talk to you about. Okay. Another thing was, we've already touched on a little bit, the Green New Deal with, and also the population explosion idea. I know you're open. You're against stopping that, but I'm curious as to what your opinion is, like, and say, for instance, the population doubles and then that doubles, and, you know, eventually it's really too many people. I'm not saying that there is right now, or that if we had a proper system, we couldn't feed and take care, everybody could be taken care of at this point. But what is your opinion about that? You seem to be totally open to let it rip.
Well, it's contingent. You always have population limits, whether, you know, thousands of years ago we had population limits, we have population limits 100 years ago, we will always, in a million years, we'll have population limits. The question is, what's defining the boundary conditions? Is it something which is built into matter, like the material forces themselves, or is it something spiritual? And I'm of the philosophical view that that we live in a living, creative, reasonable universe that's constantly recreating and moving in a certain flow and direction, and that we're made in the image of that creative flow in an open system. We're not a closed system. Like the computer model is managing the Green New Deal. So let's do this. I'll slap them the two together. Okay, Green New Deal, BRI, as questions into one. So the computer modeler is managing the Green New Deal type of Great Reset agenda, and they think like computer models. And a computer is a closed system. You have code. It's built upon binary ones and zeros. The mathematical formulas have to balance on one side. Math is closed. It's perfect balance, perfect symmetry. They want us to play by rules that assume as axiomatic that what we have now is all that can be, as far as like wealth. So we're living in an entropic system. All closed systems are entropic. Entropic simply means the potential for change is diminishing with time. So, you know, in that sense, the more people there are, the more resources they consume, the less there is to go around, the more tension is created, and the system goes into collapse as its natural order. Now, in the Green New Dealer standpoint, they just believe that the best you can do is diminish your impact on nature, diminish your consumption for at least the majority, right? The elite at the top, they can keep on being as overbloated as they want to be. So it's whatever. But ultimately, there's still a nihilistic view that ultimately the system we can kick the can down the road and push the collapse point a little bit into the future, but you can never avoid it. And that's partially because they have their own cosmology. In their view of the universe, there's an idea of an ultimate Big Bang and a heat death. They've put limits. Okay. Can you believe this? On the whole universe, they just said the limits that we have in a gas-powered machine in the 19th century, where you put oil in, you burn it, you get heat, it does work, and the gas runs down. That's just like the whole universe. And they extrapolated that on the friggin' universe. And they said thus the whole universe is going to go into a heat death and die. And we're just a reflection to be of that. So it's natural that empires behave like empires and just drain the system down. That's what we do. We're a parasite.
What's kind of an excuse for nihilism, right?
Very much so. And which is why they promote it, because it makes people more susceptible to adapt to the type of unnatural system that they want us to adapt to. That's why they promote that in our school system, and they promote that in our culture, and they promote that in our movies, is this,
But the Green New Deal is, you know, depending on solar panels, electric cars, and windmills or turbines. And there's, and I know that Cynthia is saying that they're knocking out nuclear, that nowadays is actually responsible for a lot of the energy we need And when they remove that, they're not going to be able to sustain humanity with the things that are replacing it with. And
No.
also the fact that by mining for all the minerals that they need for 8 billion people, will have a very negative effect on the environment. And they're not
Yeah.
don't seem to be considering that. And what seems particularly scary is that it'll only work if you get rid of 95% of the people. Then it's a great idea. Then it'll
Yeah,
be one.
yeah, that's exactly what they don't want to ever say out loud, but sometimes they do. They can't help themselves. It's almost like a creepy giddiness where they talk, but they usually don't let that slip out the way you just said it. So yeah, what Cynthia just did in a recent lecture she did on Are There Limits to Growth? She was going through an example of you watched it?
Yeah, I did.
Oh, cool. Yeah, she
I'm
went
trying
through
to be
wonderful.
educated about what you guys are doing.
Yeah, she surprised the hell out of me, and she went through a couple of amazing technologies that have been suppressed. And if you really look at the type of things that have been suppressed, there's a reason why the oligarchy tries to sabotage and suppress. Like they will fund alternative modes of energy. There's been incredible work done on like the Robert Bussard polywell that I've been looking at that's produced self-organizing plasmas that have produced fusion for a fraction of the cost of the tokamaks, which were being funded by the US Navy up until 2006 when it started producing real beautiful results. And then they classified everything, shut it down. And Robert Bussard, this beautiful scientist, he died a broken man a year later, thinking like everything was being sabotaged. So that's what they tend to do. And if you actually allowed a lot of these things to be properly funded and implemented, the things that we think are limits today, or even the things that we think of as being mining, like Cynthia went through the fusion torch, the fusion.
Yeah, that's what I looked that up afterwards because I thought, wow, I want to buy
Easy.
one of those things and see how expensive they are.
But yeah, I mean, they were on the cusp of making serious prototypes of this back in the 60s. They were funding this, national governments, and then it was all shut down when the Malthusians took over. The depopulation fanatics took over the dead bodies of Bobby and Martin
and
Luther King.
Yeah.
So okay, what is this? I mean, the fusion torch will allow you to literally deal with the fourth state of matter. Everything exists in liquid, solid, gas, or if you keep on heating a gas, every element on the periodic table can be stripped of its electrons and become positively charged gases, ions, which is plasma. It's the fourth state of matter. Everything can be broken down into a plasma. So an average cubic mile of seawater has within it, it's very diffused, but it has something like 70 times more iron than human beings use in an industrial advanced society. In like you could just process that in a fusion torch or even landfills. You could break all of that garbage we've been piling onto Africa and break it down into plasmas, and then each isotope and atom has their own electron or atomic signature, which with the magnetic fields there's various ways you could filter out which elements you want to have, if you want pure silicon or whatever, and then reconstruct and have now incredible new resources, which we could then use instead of mining the earth.
I noticed that, and I thought that was incredible. And you know that one of our strategies is to make an encyclopedia of innovations with a very up-to-date, way past Wikipedia method for people to access whatever type of innovation they need for their particular thing. And we're in the process of creating that. And also the idea of a network of networks of like-minded people and organizations set up with the most advanced tools for collaborating and organizing on all scales as a strategy as to how we can have some power as human beings, and when we're at the mercy of the merciless, that being the governments, we need to actually unify on a large scale. And that's what we've been working on since March 2020, but it's a very slow process. It's possible, I'm sure it's feasible, but we could use more help in that. So because it's not that we don't know how to do it, it's just that the coding takes forever. And also there's a lot of intricate problems with interoperability and all these different things, collaborating with other groups that are trying to do the same thing and having a equal authority in the thing, so it's not like a top-down controlling thing.
Mm-hmm.
Strategies. Those two strategies I'm talking about.
Mm-hmm. So if there's anybody listening who has skill sets and communicate with
Yeah,
Tom immediately.
yeah, please.
He needs help.
I mean, what is your strategy for how we can change the course of history to a good ending or beginning?
I mean, with the Rising Tide Foundation that Cynthia and I have created, I mean, the focus that we place on this is in reviving the lost method of humanist, classical Renaissance humanist educational practices in the arts and music and science, which has obvious application in terms of the science of human economics and other things, which you can't jump the gun. A lot of people want to go straight into economics and skip the question of the cultural development of what makes a mature human being versus, you know,
Superficial human being.
yeah, like an infantile, soul caught in a man's body, like living with temper tantrums and stuff, and so we're trying to do that on the one hand with an appreciation of focus on understanding this subtle quality of history that is often too easily overlooked, the cultural fights. What are the points of the exemplars that we
So
can,
I
you
mean,
know,
in a way, you're educating people
yeah,
in a
like
way they've never been educated before. That's what I love about what you're doing. I mean, it really does bring up a lot of points that are pretty much lost. And but to educate humanity is like a huge kind of challenge.
it's a test run, like what we're trying to do is capacity build. So a lot of this stuff, we're sort of going out of our element in some ways here, but we have to because there's just a vacuum. And so it's capacity building on the one hand, and what we hope to do is to increasingly develop abilities along the way, insights for this quality, with accompanying websites that we're constructing as well as teaching guides. For example, one thing I'm doing with my art instructor, I've got a classical painting instructor who's a good friend of mine. I've been working with him for years, and he's an astronomer as well. So we've been building. He's the lead builder with our Rising Tide Foundation of
Telescope.
a dodecahedral observatory. Yeah, it's built. It's this beautiful observatory he's built with an engineer he hired, and I've been helping him. And it's a big dodecahedron with pentagons on all sides, with a big telescope and a platform, which is going to be set up on one of the biggest mountains in Quebec, or at least one of the most friendly mountains for this sort of thing, devoid of any light pollution, with a building that we're constructing for a teaching academy for young people that will be bussed in. There's a new road being built right now with the collaborator. And this is going to be a place where kids can both get practical hands-on education of learning how the night sky, how did the ancients come to understand the celestial sphere and the motion of the precession of the equinoxes and other things. So very good hands-on practical knowledge will be gathered, while the teaching structure is going to have instruments like the Pythagorean monochord. We're going to be able to do geometric pedagogy and things like that to give them a sense of what's the theory of the universe that's underlying what you're seeing with your eyes.
Well, I don't.
Mm.
I'm curious as to how you get the funding for something like that. But also, I wanted to say that we also have an education program for children where I live, and what we're interested in is guiding them to become autodidacts. And one way that we would like to do that is with virtual reality. So what you're creating, we could get a video of what appears in the telescope and put it into the virtual reality so that the child is virtually there and learning in this way. It's a lot cheaper than what you're doing. I mean, I'm not saying there's anything wrong with you doing. It's beautiful, but we are not in a position to do things like that. So what do you think about that? Using virtual reality as
All tools should be used for the good,
yeah.
So obviously kids who are in a city environment, especially where there is a lot of light pollution, using a telescope is very difficult. Having an actual virtual program that has the whole night sky mapped out, with some good interface, that would be fun. That's a really great complementary idea.
Yeah, I wish you would make some kind of video like that we could put into our virtual reality and for selling all around the world
Yeah, sure.
for people.
Well, then that's part of it. Like we're completely funded by donors, so we're trying to just inspire people to want to help out, and that helps that we got somebody who did to donate the land. They just love the idea. My collaborator Patrick Sear, who's the artist, he just sold it really nicely as an elevator pitch, and they liked it, and they said, okay, use our land, and they're doing that. So
Oh,
right now we're trying to fundraise to build a better telescope because right now we got a very small telescope.
I
Um,
see.
we want to try to upgrade to something a little bit more majestic that can really give you a full appreciation of the rings of Saturn more directly, or other galaxies where right now you see it and it's kind of fuzzy.
Okay, well,
Um,
let me just jump in here because I have a urgency when you
yeah,
told me there was only 10 minutes left. So,
okay.
uh, one other thing, yeah, I was interested in your ideas. I know that you're enthusiastic about the Chinese Belt and Road Initiative, and I, if you could just briefly explain it, because I've already looked it up, but for the viewers,
Mhm.
and also speak of its benefits, but also the issues that are involved with it.
Yeah, okay. And this should probably, I guess, be the thing that rounds out our discussion. I lose track of time very easily myself. Okay, so the Belt and Road Initiative is something initiated in 2013 in October by Xi Jinping. The concept is a fluid concept with a basic macro structure, but it's hyperfluid. It's not like a solid idea. So people are like, well, what is it? And there's not a direct answer because it requires a lot of flexibility of the parts. So there's multiple nations. Currently 140 nations have signed on to the framework to cooperate and join in varying ways.
Mhm.
Some in the South America, a lot in Africa, across Asia, some in Europe. Russia's a big player that's integrated the Eurasian Economic Union of Russia with the Belt and Road. That's completely one unified process. It's basically what you see coming out of it is the construction of long-term, like 10 to 30-year infrastructure projects based upon rail, a lot of high-speed rail, a lot of industrial corridors, which have branches from the east to the west, so from China to Europe, with another maritime component too.
Yeah.
A lot of the choke points on the seas have been monopolized by the Anglo-American establishment over decades, kind of like the old British Empire. It would control the world by choke points. That never changed. So what China has done with Russia is they've created new corridors over the seas, and on the other hand, release themselves of dependency on sea trade in some ways that's been monopolized by building overland corridors, and exporting this process of building industrial programs, so productive zones in Ethiopia, in Nigeria, Kenya, other places, right? Um, so the key thing that makes this work is that it's built around a financial system of Eurasia, especially China, which is the only country to keep a hold of its national banking system. They never privatized their national banks the way every other country was induced to do. So they actually have national controls of their central banks. There's four big major national banks that they use to emit credit for these types of things.
Right.
Um, and that's what scares the hell out of a lot of the oligarchs in the West, who are afraid that this is something which will spread because it works. It works really well. We used to do it before I was born. Maybe you were a little baby when there were still some tastes of this in some little ways, of a nation emitting credit for a project. That was a very long term, not immediate speculation. And if you try to speculate the way we do in the West to make money on just gambling on commodities that have been securitized, whether it's oil or whatever you want, you go to jail in China. You can't do that. It's a totally different paradigm. And there's problems. There's pollution. There's other things. But the point is, it's a totally different paradigm.
Okay,
Yeah.
but I was just reading up on it recently to try
Hmm.
to be somewhat informed. And I was reading something that was critical of it, so it's probably an oligarchical type of website or whatever. And one thing they were saying is that China's making a lot of loans to countries to be able to create these things.
Yeah.
And a lot of the loans are kind of like the IMF or something like where they're just too huge to ever be paid off. And so
It's so
certain
shameless.
countries will be
It's so
indebted to them to
yeah,
control them,
yeah, yeah, yeah,
stuff like
yeah.
that.
So if you want to nip that in the bud, yeah, the Chinese debt trap thing is being repeated and repeated and repeated based upon the fact that it's called like Freudian projection. You know, like we're the debt like John Perkins, right? We are the debt trap masters. We've been doing it for like 80 years. And we're projecting psychologically onto the other what we've already been guilty of doing, which is, yeah, you give people a loan, but with conditionalities that they not use that loan on investing in local production or any of these things, right? You have to use these foreign enterprises to build the oil, and that is just going to be for export to the Western market, and it's going to benefit, nothing is going to benefit the Nigerian people. But we'll give you some extra money as bribes to like solidify your whatever local corruption you're dealing with, right? So that's what we've been doing for a long time. Britain was doing it in Egypt back in the 19th century, and India and every other place. So China, okay, why is this a fraud? When you look at the distribution of the investments and the loans of China in Africa, for example, it's a great one. They are investing, unlike us, they are actually investing in serious infrastructure as like, so they're getting China's getting stuff out of it. It's not that they're being just, angels. They need resources. Africa has that. So they're benefiting, but it's more honest business because they're also investing in serious infrastructure, water systems, schools, hospitals. They're building all this stuff across the board. They're actually building for the first time national African banks, which they're actually encouraging that occur, and they're investing in the training of Africans to become the engineers and to develop the skill sets so that they will manage and teach the next generations these skills that the West has been depriving.
I get your point that it seems like they're actually presenting something that's fair,
Well, just to finish my point, it's anti-inflationary debt. They're creating debts that they take a longer time, so they create debt now. But when the big project that takes 5 or 10 years to finish is finished, it creates such abundance that it extinguishes the debt, but it takes time. So if you're just looking at the myopic little snapshots, it looks like it's bad debt. But look at the future when the project is finished, when the Grand Renaissance Dam of Ethiopia that's going to be producing 6,000 megawatts of energy, when that's finished,
I see
that is going to extinguish itself.
Well, let me just ask you a quick question. So, like, it seems like China I know some people have lived in China, and they do say that the government has a different attitude there. They really are trying to make it good for the people in a lot of ways. But what about the fact that China, it has cameras everywhere and it's such an authoritarian country that and I know that we receive a lot of propaganda about China, but what is your opinion about that? I mean, how can we trust China when they have this kind of Communist Party grip on everything?
I did a series of articles called Debunking Anti-China Narratives.
Yeah.
It's a series of 3 articles. It's going to be 6 articles soon. And it's also, there's several chapters in my new book that people can get on my website, which deals with this in various angles. Part of it is that we'll never know what China would have done had they have not been under constant warfare to destroy them from the CIA, from MI6, that has all sorts of hybrid forms of warfare, which is huge. Like the deep state that was created by George Soros, Kissinger, is a beast, and it's a parasitical beast that Xi Jinping has been fighting against. Patriots have been fighting against even before Xi, but it's still something which has been done to destroy China and reduce it to a slave class under what Henry Kissinger wanted in the early 70s, which is a permanently cheap labor zone of exports for the consumer West under this Morlocks LOI, H.G. Wells type of time machine model. So China's fighting against a lot of non-linear warfare. There's a lot of NED, National Endowment for Democracy, CIA fronts that utilize all sorts of agents. And so we don't know what they would have done had that not been there. But the fact is, we don't live in an equal playing field. There's no like honest game going on. There's constant warfare to destroy them. So I think that a lot of the surveillance, the CIA, asshole John Bolton, he just wrote a big op-ed angrily saying that China's authoritarian cameras have made it really hard for the CIA to keep their agents in place. They're not able to pay them anymore because now all of the transfers are all being followed to their source. And John Bolton is having a meltdown over this because it's making it so hard for. And he's basically admitting that what China did is kind of justified because, like, you just said it. So I think that that's part of the thing, you know. There's warfare going on to destroy China, and they're trying to protect themselves. So and sometimes it might be over excessive, you know, and that's unfortunately part of the reality we're in. But
Yeah. Well, I think we covered a lot of ground, and I really appreciate your attitude and openness and scholarship. So thanks so much for this, and we'll see if we can get a wider audience to hear some of these ideas. And you're welcome to also, if you like. And I hope maybe sometime we could have another conversation when there's more for us to talk about.
absolutely, I think the world is giving us a lot of stuff to talk about. That's the one good thing about living in a time of crisis, is there's no shortage of new new material for discussion. And for your database on great inventions, keep us posted on that. That's a high level of, we're highly passionate, obviously, about that sort of thing. So let's keep that dialogue going.
All right. Okay. Thank you, Matthew.
All right, Tom. See ya.
Most famous.